So I wanted to ask about the first death that is shown because it's quite sudden and it's shown very matter of factly and you don't dwell upon it. It really underscores just the harshness of reality of that time period and how fragile life is. Can you speak to just showing that sudden murder that occurs and then just moving on with the story? You don't really spend a bunch of time dwelling and it makes it all the more jarring, I thought.
It's actually interesting you should ask that question because this is I haven't done a lot of sort of brutality in my earlier films. They've been slightly more polished in that sense, and I felt that this film really needed to show how it was, how it really was in those days. And if you are attacked, it's just there's not a lot of value on human life. If you're attacked, it's either you or the person that attacks you. And so, and even though it's our protagonist, I still wanted it to feel almost like that's just how it goes. If you travel through the forest, somebody attacks you, this person gets shot and you just move on. That's just how it is. And I thought that was an effective way also to show that our main character is somebody who's been in the army for 25, 30 years. And this is almost every day for him.
And you've worked with Mads before, so obviously you have that great working relationship and you know what he brings to the table. But what made you so confident that he would be the perfect fit for the role of Ludwig? Because he's great throughout this movie.
I think Mads, honestly, to me, he can play everything. I think he's one of the greatest actors of our time, not just the greatest Danish actors. So I think that just having him is really lucky. He was obviously, I think he was a perfect fit for the role, seeing as the kind of guy that Ludwig is, the kind of journey he has, even his age, his experience. I thought immediately when I read the novel, this is adapted from a novel. When I read the novel, it was 5 pages into it. I went like, okay, this needs to be Mads or nothing. I just didn't think I could do this film without him. So I called him up even after having read almost half the book. I called him up and said, I have this project. Are you interested in doing that? I think he has a subtlety of performance and such an intensity to his performance that I think to me he really is the film. Like he's everything in this film.
Frederick is just beyond evil in this movie when he throws the maid out of the house, the window. That was just, I was not expecting that.
No.
How did you go about, really portraying this character as just as rotten as can be?
Yeah, he was certainly rotten. There was a lot of I thought one of the cool things was to have an antagonist like that kind of has a little bit more modern view on the time, on life. Like he says, basically, he keeps saying life is chaos, right? And whereas Mass's character keeps saying, no, you can control life. And if you ask me honestly, I actually believe that life is chaos. So I kind of find myself agreeing a little more with the antagonist. And me and the co-writer always found it fun to have an antagonist that was maybe, and Mads will probably kill me for saying this, a little bit smarter than the protagonist, so that was interesting. And he's based the Shingle guy, the antagonist is based on a real person. So we did a little research. He was a horrible, horrible person. He was a tyrant. He was brutal to his subjects, and so it was actually a lot of it was drawn from real life. Even some of the ways that he tortured his peasants, that was something that we found out he did in real life.
That's wild. And you touched about the philosophy, and I love that like dinner scene where Mads and both of the characters are going back and forth talking about chaos. And I thought that was such a fascinating exchange. What did you like most about just getting their different philosophies, onto the screen and having that played out early on? Because it really does set them up as very different people and it allows the viewer as well to relate to both characters, seeing how they view the world.
Right. I thought that was it's such a beautiful way of setting up, like you say. It's almost like you have these two characters. You have a scene that shows how different they are. in not just in personality and of course in status and wealth, but also in the way they approach life. And I thought it's a beautiful thing to have the antagonist and the protagonist kind of actually have a really strong discussion about the theme of the film, which is rare that you're able to do that because it's so outspoken in that scene. They literally, one person is saying, I believe you can control your life, and the other person is saying, I believe life is chaos and you just have to roll with it. And I thought this is interesting. They're now setting up these two life philosophies, and the rest of the film is basically, let's see who's right, let's see who turns out to be right. And I thought that was really interesting.
I love the original Danish title, The Bastard, because
Right.
Ludwig's like his past and his upbringing and his desire to kind of come up in society and reach nobility is really at the core of the story. Can you speak to just the class system and how it really envelops the whole story in the background, and it really determines his rise, his drive to rise up and get some respect. And we saw him get to captain, which was took a long time for him. And yeah, could you just speak to that aspect? Because I thought that was such an interesting part of the film.
I think looking at, if you look at the 1700s, whether no matter where you are in the world, I think that if you're not somebody, if you're not a rich person or a noble person in the 1700s, you really are nobody. Like, you have no power. You're at the mercy of everybody else. You're just surviving. And that's what I think life was like for 99% of the population. But I think it's interesting to show it in such a stark manner. Like, either you're somebody or you have no power. People can do whatever they want with you, and that certainly shows, when you see the antagonist, De Schinkel, how he treats everybody. He can treat them as his toys, basically, and nobody can really touch him. But I thought what was interesting, I think, is also that there's certain metaphors to our world today. I think there is that feeling today that we have, a lot of us, that we're a little bit powerless at what's going on, in the upper echelons of power, and that people are deciding and kind of playing with us a little bit, and we're a little bit helpless with everything that's going on. I mean, we are living in democracies, but sometimes we don't quite feel as if we're living in democracies. So I thought that was interesting to have, like, this kind of juxtaposition to our modern world. But really, it's also, Ludwig, as you know, like, he really wants to become somebody. I think anybody can identify with that. I mean, the drive and ambition to make his mark and become important. Of course, for him, it was very much about proving that he's not a bastard, right? That he's actually somebody worthy to become noble. But then the film is also about him maybe realizing that's not everything, right? That's might not be the only important thing.
And you've done other films that are set or roughly around this time period in the 18th century. Is there an aspect of that time period that you find particularly fascinating, or is this just a coincidence that you keep coming back to?
I think it's not so much a coincidence as it is me being such a lover of films that take you into new worlds, and I certainly love films that take place in the modern world, but I don't do much of them. I really love sort of like building a world and creating something and showing people this is what it was like, and look at this, and it was so desolate, or it was so refined, but I also think the 18th century was also a huge, like, there was so many changes going on all over the world. There was like a moment of of radical change. There was the Enlightenment, there was the revolution, there was a revolution here, there was a revolution in France. Like, that century was really where our current sort of like society was born, in a way. And so I think that's just interesting to me. My last film was about that sort of wave of enlightenment. The Royal Affair was about how things started to change, and this is set slightly before, in the dark ages of that century. So I thought it was interesting to go back to that period, and I might even go back again. I don't know.
And the young girl in the film, Melina, I
Yeah,
loved her performance, and she just plays off Mads so well. They have some really funny exchanges and some
right.
really heartfelt ones. Can you speak to just working with her? Because I thought she was brilliant in the role.
She's amazing. She's such a fantastic girl. She had never done any acting before in her life, and so she was a complete newcomer to the sort of like to even making films. And she was the light of that whole production. Like every day, she would just bring joy to everybody. She's very much like she is in the film. She's like that as a person. So she yells a lot and dances around and screams and has fun. And what we found was that we were kind of leaned into her way of doing things. Um, her sort of like instincts. It was better than trying to shape her. So what she really did was she brought her own personality into the character of And My Moose, and we just embraced that personality.
And then my last question for you, you've written so many great films as well as the ones that you've directed. How do you decide on like which projects you're going to pursue as a director, or which ones you're going to hand off for somebody else to do?
Yeah, to be honest, sometimes it's a little bit random. Sometimes I get asked to write a film for another director, and if I like the project, I say yes. Usually that's what happens, so I don't really have that choice. There was one time I had a choice, and that was actually The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, where I was just asked, "Do you want to write and direct?" And I said, "You know what? I just want to write this." And I think that was probably the biggest mistake of my life that I didn't choose to direct that. But in the end, it all turned out well. I think, it was a pleasure working with the director, and he certainly made some great choices on that. So I think it's a little bit like what's the job? Like, am I being asked to write something, or am I being asked to direct and write something?